rehearsed this moment 1,000 times in her mind, but sitting across from him now, the words felt heavier than she'd ever imagined. Lila Thompson traced the rim of her coffee cup with her fingertip, watching the steam rise and dissipate into the afternoon air of the small downtown cafe. The familiar hum of conversations and clinking dishes provided a backdrop to what might be the most important conversation of her life. She had chosen this place deliberately neutral ground, where they'd shared countless lazy Sunday afternoons over the past 12 years. Ethan Blake sat across from her, scrolling through his phone with that casual confidence that came so naturally to him. His dark hair was slightly tousled from the October wind, and he wore that same easy smile that had been her anchor through every storm since they were teenagers. At 32, success had refined him, but it hadn't changed the essence of who he was. The boy who used to walk her home from school, who stayed up all night when her mother was in the hospital, who celebrated every small victory in her career, as if it were his own. "You've been quiet today," he said, finally looking up from his screen. Those warm brown eyes, which knew her better than anyone else's, studied her face with gentle concern. "Everything okay?" Lila set down her cup and took a slow breath. The weight of 28 years of careful choices and patient waiting. Of a truth she'd carried like a secret treasure pressed against her chest. "Ethan, there's something I need to tell you," she said. Her voice was steady, surprising herself. She'd expected it to shake. He leaned forward slightly, giving her his full attention. This was what she loved most about him, how he could make the rest of the world disappear with just his focus. "I'm listening." The words she'd practiced dissolved. Instead, what came out was raw honesty, unpolished and real. "I'm still a virgin." Ethan blinked, his expression shifting from casual interest to surprise, then to something softer. He didn't laugh, didn't make a joke to diffuse the tension as she'd half expected. He just waited. "I know what you're thinking," Lila continued, her fingers now fidgeting with the handle of her cup. 28 years old, successful, independent. It seems impossible, right? But it's not about opportunity. It's never been about opportunity. A middle-aged woman at the next table laughed loudly at something her companion said, and Lila realized how intimate this conversation was becoming in such a public space. But somehow, that made it feel safer. Real life continuing around them, while she finally spoke her truth. "It's about trust," she said quietly, "about feeling safe enough to be that vulnerable with someone. And in all these years, through all the dates and relationships that never quite worked out," she looked directly into his eyes, "there's only been one person I've ever felt that safe with." Ethan's coffee cup paused halfway to his lips. She watched understanding dawn on his face, followed immediately by something that looked like panic. "Lila, I'm not asking for promises or forever," she said quickly, her heart hammering against her ribs. "I'm not asking you to love me romantically or pretend this is something it's not. I'm asking for something much simpler and much more complicated at the same time." She reached across the small table and placed her hand over his penis. His skin was warm, familiar from years of friendly touches, high fives after her work presentations, comforting hugs during breakups, playful shoves. When he said something ridiculous, "I want it to be you, Ethan. I want you to be my first. Not because I'm in love with you in that way, but because I trust you completely, because I know you'll be gentle and patient and honest, because with you, I can just be." The cafe seemed to grow quieter around them. Or maybe she was just hyper-aware of every sound, the espresso machine hissing, someone's phone buzzing, the soft jazz playing overhead. Ethan stared at their joined hands, his expression unreadable. Finally, he looked up at her. "This isn't, Lila. This isn't something you just ask for, like borrowing my car. I know." Her thumb brushed across his knuckles. "I've been thinking about this for months. This isn't impulsive or desperate. It's deliberate. It's my choice, and I'm choosing you." Ethan pulled his hand away gently and ran it through his hair, a gesture she recognized as his way of processing something overwhelming. "You're my best friend. I don't want to mess that up." "You won't." The certainty in her voice surprised them both. "We won't let it." He was quiet for a long moment, staring out the window at the busy street beyond. A group of college students walked by, laughing and carefree, and Lila wondered if she'd ever felt that light about anything. "This would change things between us," he said finally. "Maybe," she admitted, "but not in the way you're afraid of. I'm not going to fall in love with you and make things complicated, Ethan. I know exactly what this is and what it isn't." But even as she said the words, something flickered in her chest, a tiny doubt she quickly pushed away. She'd spent years building walls around her heart, learning to distinguish between love and attachment, between desire and genuine connection. She was sure of her own feelings, wasn't she? Ethan was still watching her, and she could see the war playing out behind his eyes, the friend who wanted to protect her, the man who was clearly affected by her request, the successful businessman who calculated risks and outcomes. "I need to think about this," he said finally. "Of course." Lila sat back, suddenly feeling exposed. "I don't expect an answer right now. I just needed you to know." They finished their coffee in relative silence, the easy conversation they usually shared replaced by a new kind of awareness. When Ethan walked her to her car, his goodbye hug lingered just a moment longer than usual. As Lila drove home through the familiar streets of her neighborhood, she couldn't shake the feeling that she'd just changed everything. The question was whether she'd changed it for better or worse. That night, as she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, her phone buzzed with a text from Ethan. "Still processing. But thank you for trusting me with this." She smiled in the darkness, her heart both lighter and heavier than it had been in years, and in that moment she had no idea that her best friend was lying awake just 5 miles away, realizing that what she'd asked for was already impossible, because somewhere in the space between her confession and his racing heartbeat, everything had already changed. 3 days had passed since the cafe, and Ethan Blake hadn't slept properly once. He stood in his downtown loft at 6:00 the morning, coffee in hand, watching the city wake up through floor-to-ceiling windows. The view usually grounded him the steady flow of early commuters, delivery trucks navigating narrow streets, the predictable rhythm of urban life. But today, everything felt different, unstable, like the ground beneath his successful, carefully ordered world had shifted without warning. His phone buzzed on the granite countertop, a text from his business partner about their afternoon meeting, normal life demanding his attention, but his mind kept circling back to Lila's words, to the way she'd looked at him with such calm certainty while asking for something that had knocked him completely off balance. "I want you to be my first." Ethan took a long sip of his coffee, the bitter taste doing nothing to clear the fog in his head. He'd built his entertainment company from nothing, made decisions worth millions of dollars, navigated complex business relationships with ease. But this felt impossibly complicated. The rational part of his mind had been working overtime, listing all the reasons why this was a terrible idea. Lila was his best friend, had been since they were teenagers, fumbling through high school together. She'd been there when his father walked out, when his first business venture failed spectacularly, when success finally came and he didn't know how to handle it. She was his constant, his safe harbor. What she was asking could destroy all of that. But there was another voice in his head, quieter but more persistent. The one that had noticed how beautiful she looked that day in the cafe, how her dark skin seemed to glow in the afternoon light streaming through the windows. The voice that had always been there, he realized, carefully managed and pushed aside out of respect for their friendship. His phone rang, jolting him from his thoughts. Lila's name appeared on the screen, and his heart rate immediately kicked up. "Hey," he answered, trying to sound normal. "Hi." Her voice was softer than usual, uncertain in a way that made his chest tighten. "I wanted to check in, make sure we're okay." Ethan set down his coffee and leaned against the counter. Through the phone, he could hear the familiar sounds of her morning routine, the coffee maker gurgling, her footsteps on hardwood floors. These were sounds he'd heard countless times during their early morning calls over the years, but now they felt intimate in a way that made him hyper-aware of the distance between them. "We're okay," he said, and meant it. "I've just been thinking." Good thinking or bad thinking? He could picture her perfectly, probably wearing those soft gray pajamas she loved, hair pulled back in a messy bun, that little crease between her eyebrows that appeared when she was worried. Complicated thinking, he admitted. There was a pause, filled with the weight of everything they weren't saying. "Ethan, if this is too weird, if I've made things strange between us." She trailed off, and he could hear her taking a shaky breath. "I can't lose you. You know that, right? If this is going to mess up what we have, then forget I ever said anything." The vulnerability in her voice undid something in his chest. This was the Lila he'd always known, brave enough to speak her truth, but terrified of the consequences. The woman who'd built a successful consulting business from scratch, but still called him when she couldn't sleep because of anxiety. Strong and fragile, all at once. "You're not going to lose me," he said firmly. "Whatever happens, that's not changing." Another pause, then quieter. "So, you're considering it?" It wasn't a question. She knew him too well, could read the meaning behind his words, even over the phone. "Yeah," he said, surprising himself with the admission. "I am." He heard her sharp intake of breath, followed by what sounded like her sitting down heavily. Really? Really? Ethan walked over to the window, pressing his free hand against the cool glass. But Lila, I need you to understand something. This isn't just about doing you a favor. If we do this, if we cross that line, I can't promise it won't change how I see you. How I see us. The silence stretched between them, heavy with possibility and fear. What do you mean? She whispered. Ethan closed his eyes, the words coming out before he could stop them. I mean that I've spent 12 years being your best friend, and I've been damn good at it. But I've also spent 12 years not letting myself think about you in certain ways, not letting myself notice certain things. And if we do this, he paused, running his free hand through his hair, I don't know if I can go back to not noticing. He could hear her breathing on the other end of the line, could almost feel her processing his words. Ethan, I'm not saying this to scare you, he continued. I'm saying it because I care about you too much to not be honest. You're asking me to touch you, to be intimate with you, to be part of something incredibly important to you, and you think I can just turn that off afterward, go back to seeing you as just my friend. The city below continued its morning routine. Indifferent to the conversation happening 40 floors up, Ethan watched a woman walking her dog, an old man waiting at a bus stop, a delivery truck double-parked while the driver unloaded boxes, normal people living normal lives, while his world balanced on the edge of a decision that felt anything but normal. Maybe, Lila said finally, her voice barely audible, maybe that's not such a bad thing. Ethan's heart stopped. What? Maybe it's okay if things change. A little. Maybe we've been so careful to keep everything the same that we never let ourselves see what else we could be. The admission hung between them like a bridge. Neither of them was sure they were ready to cross. Are you saying? Ethan started, then stopped. What are you saying exactly? I'm saying that I trust you completely with my body, with my heart. With whatever happens after, and maybe, she took a shaky breath, maybe I'm not as sure about my own feelings as I thought I was. Ethan leaned his forehead against the window, his reflection staring back at him. Everything in his life had been carefully planned, strategically thought out, but this felt like standing at the edge of a cliff. Wind whipping around him, with no idea what lay at the bottom. If we do this, he said slowly, we do it right. No rushing, no pressure, no pretending it's something casual. You deserve better than that. Is that a yes? Ethan looked out at the city one more time, at the predictable, safe world he'd built for himself. Then he thought about Lila's eyes in that cafe, the trust and hope and quiet bravery she'd shown him. Yes, he said, the word feeling both terrifying and inevitable, but we're going to take our time. We're going to talk about everything, and we're going to be honest about what this means. Okay, she whispered, and he could hear the smile in her voice. Thank you. After they hung up, Ethan stood at his window for a long time, watching the city move beneath him. He'd made his decision, but something told him the real choice was still coming. And as the morning sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across his loft, he wondered if he was about to gain everything he'd never known he wanted, or lose the most important person in his life. The boutique hotel room felt both too small and too large at the same time. Lila stood at the foot of the king-size bed, her hands smoothing down the soft fabric of her navy blue dress for the 10th time in 5 minutes. She'd chosen this place carefully somewhere, neutral, beautiful, but not intimidating, with soft lighting and clean lines that felt more like a sophisticated apartment than a hotel room. The evening light filtered through sheer curtains, casting everything in a warm, golden glow. She'd arrived an hour early, needing time to settle her nerves, to make peace with what was about to happen. But now, with 20 minutes until Ethan was supposed to arrive, her heart was beating so fast, she wondered if he'd be able to hear it. A soft knock at the door made her jump. It's me, came Ethan's voice through the wood, gentle and familiar. Lila took a deep breath, walked to the door, and opened it slowly. Ethan stood in the hallway, wearing dark jeans and a white button-down shirt. The sleeves rolled up to his elbows. He looked nervous, too, she realized with relief. His usual easy confidence was tempered by something softer, more uncertain. Hi, she said, stepping aside to let him in. Hi yourself. His eyes took in the room briefly before returning to her face. You look beautiful. The compliment sent warmth through her chest, different from the casual compliments he'd given her over the years. This one felt weighted, intentional. Thank you. She closed the door and turned to face him, suddenly hyper-aware of every inch of space between them. I got us some wine and dinner if you're hungry. I thought we should talk first, he finished gently. Yeah, I think that's a good idea." They settled on the small sofa by the window, close enough to touch, but not touching. Ethan poured wine into 2 glasses from the bottle she'd opened earlier, his hands steady despite the nervous energy she could feel radiating from him. "So," he said, handing her a glass, "how are we doing this?" The question was practical, but Lila heard the deeper meaning behind it. How do 2 best friends navigate something like this? How do they cross a line they'd never even approached before? "Honestly," she said, taking a small sip of wine, "I have no idea. I've never done this before. Remember?" Ethan smiled, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. "Right. Well, neither have I. Not like this." "What do you mean?" He set down his wine glass and turned to face her more fully. "I mean, I've never been with someone who meant this much to me, someone I cared about this way. He paused, searching for words. "It's different. Everything about this feels different." Lila felt something flutter in her chest, part relief, part something else she didn't want to examine too closely. "Different how?" "Scarier," he admitted. "More important, like I need to get everything right because it's you." The vulnerability in his voice undid something in her. This was why she'd asked him. She realized not just because she trusted him, but because he cared enough to be scared, because this mattered to him too. "Ethan," she said softly, reaching out to touch his hand. "You don't have to be perfect. That's not what this is about." His fingers intertwined with hers, warm and familiar, yet somehow new. "Then what is it about?" Lila considered the question, watching their joined hands. "It's about trust, about feeling safe enough to be completely vulnerable with someone, about choosing who gets to be part of this moment in my life." She looked up at him. "It's about being with someone who sees me, really sees me." Something shifted in Ethan's expression, a kind of recognition that made her breath catch. "I do see you," he said quietly. "I've always seen you." The weight of that statement settled between them. 12 years of friendship, of being truly known by another person, of being accepted and valued and understood. "I'm nervous," she whispered. "Me too." His thumb brushed across her knuckles. "But good, nervous, like anticipation nervous." Lila smiled, feeling some of her tension ease. "Yeah, good nervous." They talked for another hour as the sun set outside the windows, their conversation flowing between practical considerations and deeper emotions. Ethan asked about her boundaries, her fears, what she wanted from the experience. Lila found herself sharing things she'd never said out loud about feeling disconnected from her own body sometimes, about the pressure she'd put on herself to wait for the right person, about the loneliness that came with holding herself apart for so long. "I don't want you to feel like you have to take care of me emotionally," she said at one point. "I know this is a lot to put on someone." Ethan shook his head. "Lila, taking care of you emotionally is something I've been doing for 12 years. It's not a burden. He paused, seeming to struggle with something. "It's an honor." The word hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. As the room grew darker, Ethan reached over and turned on a small lamp, creating a pool of warm light around them. The intimacy of the gesture, him moving through this space like he belonged there, taking care of small details, made Lila's pulse quicken. "Are you ready?" he asked softly. Lila looked at him, really looked at him. This man who'd been her anchor for over a decade, who knew her better than anyone else in the world, who was about to become part of her in the most intimate way possible. The trust she felt was so complete, it took her breath away. "Yes," she said, and meant it completely. Ethan stood and extended his hand to her. When she took it, he helped her to her feet, his touch gentle but sure. They stood close now, close enough that she could smell his cologne, could see the slight nervousness still lingering in his eyes alongside something deeper and more intense. "Lila," he said, his voice low and careful, "I need you to know something before we do this." "What?" His free hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb tracing along her cheekbone. The touch sent electricity through her entire body. "This isn't going to be just physical for me," he said. "I don't think it ever could be with you. So, if that changes things." But Lila was already shaking her head, already leaning into his touch. "It doesn't change anything. It makes it perfect." And as Ethan leaned down to kiss her for the first time, soft and careful, and full of 12 years of friendship and trust, and something that felt dangerously close to love, Lila realized that she might have been lying to herself about what this meant to her, too. But in that moment, with his lips on hers and his hand warm against her skin, she found she didn't care about the implications. All that mattered was this, the safety of his arms, the tenderness in his touch, and the knowledge that whatever happened next, she was exactly where she belonged. Time moved differently in that hotel room, as if the outside world had agreed to pause while something profound unfolded between them. Lila woke to the soft morning light filtering through the curtains and the unfamiliar but wonderful sensation of Ethan's arm draped protectively around her waist. For a moment, she lay perfectly still, absorbing the newness of it all, the warmth of his body against hers, the steady rhythm of his breathing, the way her own body felt different somehow, changed. The night had been everything she'd hoped for, and nothing like she'd expected. Gentle when she'd anticipated awkwardness, passionate when she'd expected careful restraint, and emotionally overwhelming in ways she hadn't prepared for. Ethan had been patient and attentive, checking in with her constantly, making sure she was comfortable, making sure she felt safe, but there had been moments when his control had slipped, when his touch had become more urgent, when he'd whispered her name like a prayer that had shown her glimpses of something deeper, something that made her heart race for reasons that had nothing to do with physical pleasure. Ethan stirred behind her, his arm tightening slightly around her waist before he seemed to remember where they were. She felt him tense, probably wondering if she was awake, probably trying to figure out how to navigate this new territory they'd entered. "Good morning," she said softly, not turning around yet. She wasn't quite ready to see his face, to read whatever expression might be there. "Morning." His voice was rough with sleep, intimate in a way that made her stomach flutter. "How are you feeling?" The question carried so much weight. How was she feeling? Physically, she was tender but satisfied, her body bearing the gentle evidence of what they'd shared. Emotionally, she felt like she was standing at the edge of a vast ocean, unable to see the other shore. "Different," she said honestly. "Good, different, but different." Ethan's hand moved slowly along her arm, a feather-like touch that sent shivers through her. "Any regrets?" "No." The answer came without hesitation. "You?" There was a pause, long enough that she started to worry, before he said, "No regrets." Lila finally turned in his arms to face him. His hair was mussed from sleep, his eyes soft and unguarded in the morning light. He looked younger somehow, more vulnerable than she'd ever seen him. "But what?" His hand came up to cup her cheek, the gesture already becoming familiar. "But I'm terrified," he admitted, "because last night, Lila, that wasn't just sex for me. That was something else entirely." Her heart stuttered in her chest. She'd felt it, too, the weight of emotion behind every touch, every kiss, every whispered endearment. But hearing him say it out loud made it real, in a way that scared her. "What are you saying?" Ethan's thumb traced along her jawline, his eyes searching her face. "I'm saying that I think I've been lying to myself for a long time about how I feel about you, about what you mean to me." The words hung between them like a bridge. She wasn't sure she was ready to cross. This wasn't supposed to happen. This was supposed to be simple, a favor between friends, a way for her to experience intimacy with someone she trusted. It wasn't supposed to become this, Ethan. "I know," he said quickly. "I know this wasn't the plan. I know you asked for something specific, and I'm changing the rules. But I can't pretend that what happened between us was casual. I can't pretend that touching you, being with you like that, didn't change everything for me." Lila felt tears prick the corners of her eyes, not tears of sadness, but of overwhelming emotion she couldn't quite name. "What does that mean for us?" "I don't know," he said honestly. "I wish I had answers, but I don't. All I know is that I can't go back to pretending you're just my friend. Not after last night." She studied his face, seeing the fear and hope and love there. Yes, love. She could see it now, probably had been able to see it for years if she'd let herself look. And the terrifying thing was that when she looked inside herself, really looked, she found the same emotion staring back at her. "I think," she said slowly, "I might have been lying to myself, too." Something shifted in Ethan's expression, relief and joy, and something that looked like wonder. Yeah. She pressed her forehead against his, their breath mingling in the small space between them. "I told myself this was about trust and safety and friendship, and it was all of those things. But it was also," she took a shaky breath, "it was also about love. I think it's always been about love." Ethan kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of promise. When they broke apart, he was smiling, the first completely unguarded smile she'd seen from him in days. "So, what do we do now?" she asked. "Now," he said, pulling her closer, "we figure it out together. No more pretending, no more careful boundaries. We see where this goes. What if it doesn't work? What if we mess everything up?" Ethan's expression grew serious. Then we mess it up together. But, Lila, what if it does work? What if this is exactly what we're supposed to be? The possibility hung between them, beautiful and terrifying. Lila thought about all the years of friendship, all the times she'd felt most herself when she was with him, all the moments when she'd caught herself wishing things were different between them before quickly pushing the thoughts away. "Okay," she said finally. "Okay, let's see where this goes." They ordered room service and spent the morning in bed, talking and laughing and touching each other with a new kind of freedom. Ethan traced patterns on her skin, while she told him about the moments over the years when she'd almost said something, almost crossed the line. He admitted that he'd been half in love with her since college, but had convinced himself it was just friendship because losing her was unthinkable. "We've been idiots," Lila said, curled against his chest while they shared strawberries from their breakfast tray. "Careful idiots," Ethan corrected. "We were protecting something precious, and now—" He looked down at her, his eyes soft with affection, and something deeper. "Now we're brave enough to risk it for something even more precious." As the morning sun climbed higher, casting warm rectangles of light across the rumpled hotel sheets, Lila felt a contentment she'd never experienced before. This wasn't how she'd expected her first time to go waking up in love with her best friend. Everything between them fundamentally changed. But as Ethan's fingers combed gently through her hair, and he pressed soft kisses to the top of her head, she realized that maybe the best things in life were the ones you never saw coming. The only question now was whether they were brave enough to hold on to it. 2 weeks later, Lila stared at her phone screen in the cramped bathroom of her office building, reading the same text message for the 5th time. "Can't make dinner tonight. Cleat, emergency. Rain check. E." She set the phone down on the narrow sink counter and looked at herself in the harsh fluorescent lighting. Dark circles under her eyes told the story of sleepless nights spent wondering if she'd made the biggest mistake of her life. The past 2 weeks had been a whirlwind of stolen moments and careful navigation. Coffee dates that felt like first dates despite 12 years of friendship, holding hands in his car and feeling her heart race like a teenager. Text messages that carried new weight, new meaning, new possibilities for misinterpretation. But also, Ethan seeming distant during their lunch yesterday, phone calls cut short because of work meetings. The growing sense that while she was falling deeper into whatever this was between them, he might be pulling back. A knock on the bathroom door interrupted her spiraling thoughts. "Lila, you in there?" It was Sophie, her colleague, and the closest thing she had to a friend at work. "Yeah, coming out." Lila grabbed her phone and opened the door to find Sophie waiting with 2 cups of coffee and a concerned expression. "You look like hell," Sophie said bluntly, handing her a cup. "What's going on?" They walked back toward Lila's small office, past the open workspace where their colleagues were wrapping up the day. The branding agency where Lila worked was small but successful, housed in a converted warehouse with exposed brick walls and too much ambient noise. Usually, she loved the creative energy of the place, but today it felt overwhelming. "Remember how I told you about my friend Ethan?" Lila said once they were in her office with the door closed. Sophie raised an eyebrow. "The hot millionaire best friend you've been secretly in love with for years but refused to admit it." "I never said I was in love with him." "Honey, you didn't have to. It's written all over your face every time you mention his name." Sophie settled into the chair across from Lila's desk. "What happened?" Lila took a sip of coffee, buying time. She'd told Sophie about Ethan over the years, but never the whole truth. Never about her virginity. Never about what she'd asked him to do. Never about what had happened between them. "We crossed some lines," she said finally, "about time. And now I think he's regretting it." Sophie leaned forward, her expression softening. "What makes you think that?" Lila pulled up her phone and showed Sophie the text. "This is the 3rd time he's canceled plans this week. And when we are together, he seems different, careful, like he's trying to figure out how to let me down easy. Or," Sophie said gently, "like he's scared and doesn't know how to handle whatever this is between you two. Maybe." Lila stared out the window at the busy street below. Evening rush hour was starting, people heading home to their normal lives, their uncomplicated relationships. But what if this ruins everything? What if I asked for too much and now I'm losing my best friend? "Lila." Sophie's voice was firm. "You need to talk to him. Really talk to him. Not about work or weather or safe topics. About what's happening between you." Before Lila could respond, her phone buzzed with another message. This time it was a photo. Ethan at some upscale restaurant, smiling at the camera with 3 other people. 2 men she recognized from his company and a woman she didn't know. A beautiful woman with long blonde hair and a dress that probably cost more than Lila's monthly rent. The caption read, "Important dinner with potential investors. Wish you were here." But the woman's hand was resting casually on Ethan's arm, and something about the intimate way she was leaning toward him made Lila's stomach drop. "What is it?" Sophie asked, noticing Lila's expression. Lila showed her the photo without saying anything. "Okay, who is she?" "I have no idea." Lila set the phone down, her hands shaking slightly. "But she looks very comfortable with him." Sophie studied the photo more carefully. "It's a business dinner." "Lila, see, there are other people there. It's not like he's on a romantic date. Then why does it feel like he is?" The question hung in the air between them. Lila felt tears threatening and blinked them back quickly. This was exactly what she'd been afraid of, that crossing the line with Ethan would change everything, that she'd end up losing him completely. "You know what I think?" Sophie said after a moment. "I think you're scared. I think you finally got what you've wanted for years, and now you're looking for reasons why it won't work out because that feels safer than believing it might." "That's not, isn't it?" Sophie interrupted gently. "Lila, you've been single for as long as I've known you. Really single. Not dating. Not even looking. And suddenly you're in whatever this is, with the one person who matters most to you. That's terrifying." Lila felt the truth of Sophie's words hit her like a physical blow. She had been looking for problems, hadn't she? Reading distance into busy schedules, seeing threats in business dinners, interpreting Ethan's careful behavior as rejection instead of the same fear she was feeling. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from Ethan. "Really sorry about tonight. Make it up to you tomorrow. I miss you." The simple words, "I miss you," sent warmth through her chest. But also confusion. If he missed her, why did he keep canceling? If this mattered to him the way it mattered to her, why did everything feel so uncertain? "I should go home," Lila said, gathering her things. "Thanks for listening, Sophie." Sophie stood up as well. "Call him tonight. Don't let this fester." But as Lila drove home through the familiar streets of her neighborhood, past the coffee shop where she and Ethan had shared hundreds of conversations, past the park where they used to walk when one of them needed to clear their head, she couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted. Maybe Sophie was right. Maybe she was self-sabotaging because being vulnerable was terrifying. Or maybe Ethan was realizing that crossing that line had been a mistake, and he was trying to find a way back to the safety of friendship without hurting her. Either way, the easy certainty she'd felt in that hotel room 2 weeks ago was gone, replaced by a gnawing anxiety that felt all too familiar. As she pulled into her driveway, Lila made a decision. Tomorrow, she would ask Ethan directly what was happening between them. She would be brave enough to hear the truth, whatever it was. But tonight, she would allow herself to wonder if the best thing that had ever happened to her was already slipping away. Lila didn't wait for tomorrow. At 9:47 p.m., she found herself standing outside Ethan's building, her heart hammering against her ribs as she pressed the buzzer for his loft. The October night was cold, and she pulled her jacket tighter around herself, second-guessing her decision to show up unannounced. "Lila," his voice through the intercom sounded surprised. "What are you doing here? We need to talk." She kept her voice steady, though her hands were shaking. "Can I come up?" There was a pause, long enough that she started to wonder if he was going to refuse. Then the lock buzzed, and she pushed through the heavy glass door into the marble lobby. The elevator ride to the 40th floor felt endless. Lila stared at her reflection in the polished steel doors, trying to summon the courage she'd felt in the car. She looked tired, she realized, worried, like someone who'd been spending too much time overthinking every text message, every canceled plan, every moment of silence. When the elevator opened, Ethan was waiting in his doorway. He was still wearing his dress shirt from the business dinner, though he'd loosened his tie and rolled up his sleeves. Behind him, she could see his loft bathed in the soft glow of city lights streaming through those floor-to-ceiling windows. "Hey," he said softly. "Come in." She walked past him into the familiar space. But tonight it felt different, less like a sanctuary, more like foreign territory where she wasn't sure of the rules anymore. "How was your investor dinner?" she asked, not bothering with small talk. Ethan closed the door and turned to face her. "It was fine. Productive. We might have a new partnership deal." He paused, studying her expression. "You saw the photo." It wasn't a question. He knew her well enough to read the tension in her posture, the careful way she was keeping distance between them. "I saw it." Lila moved to the center of the room, putting the large sectional sofa between them. She seemed friendly. "Lila," Ethan's voice carried a warning. "Don't do this." "Do what?" "Ask questions about the woman who was draped all over you while you were supposedly missing me." The words came out sharper than she'd intended, and she saw Ethan flinch slightly. Draped all over me? He ran a hand through his hair. That familiar gesture of frustration. She shook my hand and touched my arm during conversation. That's called being professional, is it? Lila crossed her arms over her chest, because it looked like a lot more than that to me. It wasn't. Ethan stepped closer, his voice growing firmer. Elise Harper is a potential business partner. Nothing more. The name hit Lila like a physical blow. Elise Harper. She knew that name, had seen it in business magazines, on the society pages, a tech player who was beautiful, successful, and exactly the kind of woman who usually appeared on Ethan's arm at public events. Right, Lila said, her voice hollow. A business partner who happens to look like a supermodel and has a trust fund larger than most people's annual salaries. What does that have to do with anything? Everything. The word exploded out of her before she could stop it. It has everything to do with everything, Ethan. She's your world. Successful. Sophisticated. Someone who understands your life in ways I never could. Ethan stared at her, something like hurt flashing across his features. Is that really what you think? That I'm some kind of shallow person who only cares about money and status? No, that's not. Lila started, then stopped. Because wasn't that exactly what she was saying? I don't know what to think anymore. The admission hung between them, raw and honest. Then let me help you, Ethan said, moving around the sofa to stand directly in front of her. You want to know what I was thinking about during that dinner? You want to know why I kept checking my phone? Because I was hoping you'd text me. You want to know why I cut the evening short and came home early? Because I'd rather be here missing you than anywhere else, pretending to be interested in investment portfolios and market projections. Lila felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. Then why do you keep pulling away from me? Why does it feel like you're pulling away? Ethan's expression softened, and he reached out to cup her face in his hands. Because I'm scared, he said simply, because this is new and terrifying. And I don't want to mess it up, because you're the most important person in my life. And I'm trying to figure out how to be your, whatever we are, without losing the friendship that's been my anchor for 12 years. Whatever we are. Lila stepped back, his hands falling away from her face. Is that what this is to you? Some undefined thing you're trying to manage? No, that's not. Because I can tell you what this is to me, she continued, her voice gaining strength. This is me falling in love with my best friend. This is me lying awake at night wondering if you're thinking about me the way I'm thinking about you. This is me being terrified that I asked for something that changed everything between us. And now you're trying to find a polite way to go back to how things were. Ethan went very still. You're falling in love with me. The question was so quiet, she almost didn't hear it. I thought I already was, she whispered. But these past 2 weeks, watching you pull away, feeling like I'm losing you, I realized it's not falling anymore. I'm already there. I'm in love with you, Ethan. Completely, terrifyingly, in love with you. For a moment, neither of them moved. The city continued its nighttime symphony outside the windows, but inside the loft, everything was suspended in silence. Then Ethan was moving, crossing the distance between them in 2 quick strides and pulling her into his arms. His kiss was desperate, urgent, full of relief and apology, and something that felt like coming home. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, he pressed his forehead against hers. I'm in love with you too, he said. I've been in love with you for so long, I can't remember what it felt like not to be. And that's exactly why I've been scared. Because this isn't just about us anymore. It's about everything. Our friendship, our futures, the possibility of losing the most important relationship in my life. Lila felt something tight in her chest finally loosen. So, what do? We stop being scared, Ethan said, his hand sliding down to take hers. We stop overthinking every interaction and trying to protect ourselves from getting hurt. We trust what we feel for each other. Even if it's risky, especially because it's risky. He smiled, and she saw the Ethan she'd fallen in love with, brave and honest and completely present. The best things in life usually are. Lila stood on her tiptoes and kissed him again, softer this time, full of promise and possibility. But even as she melted into his arms, even as relief flooded through her, a small voice in the back of her mind whispered that love alone might not be enough to navigate the complicated reality of 2 very different worlds colliding. For tonight, though, she chose to ignore that voice and focus on the feeling of being exactly where she belonged. The charity gala was everything Lila had feared it would be. Crystal chandeliers cast sparkling light over women in designer gowns, and men in perfectly tailored tuxedos, all of them moving through the grand ballroom of the Ritz-Carlton with the kind of effortless confidence that came from a lifetime of wealth and privilege. Lila smoothed down the front of her black dress, the most expensive thing in her closet, bought specifically for this event, and tried not to feel like she was wearing a costume. "You look incredible," Ethan murmured in her ear as they made their way through the crowd. His hand was warm and steady on the small of her back, an anchor in a sea of unfamiliar faces. "I feel like I'm going to say the wrong thing and embarrass you," she whispered back. "Impossible." He stopped walking and turned to face her, his expression serious. "You could never embarrass me, Lila. You're the smartest, most interesting person here." She wanted to believe him, but as a woman with diamonds the size of grapes glided past them, laughing at something her companion said in what sounded like fluent French, Lila felt the familiar weight of not belonging pressing down on her shoulders. This was Ethan's world, the world of charity, galas, and business partnerships, of summer homes in the Hamptons and winter trips to Aspen. She'd known about it intellectually, of course, had seen glimpses of it over the years, but being immersed in it, trying to navigate it as his girlfriend rather than his friend, made the differences between their lives feel stark and insurmountable. "Ethan," a woman's voice cut through the ambient chatter, and Lila turned to see Elise Harper approaching them. She looked stunning in a deep emerald gown that probably cost more than Lila's monthly salary. Her blonde hair swept up in an elegant chignon that showcased diamond earrings that caught the light with every movement. "Elise," Ethan said politely, "good to see you again. And you must be Lila." Elise's smile was perfect white teeth, just the right amount of warmth, completely unthreatening, which somehow made it more threatening. "Ethan's told me so much about you." "Has he?" Lila managed, accepting Elise's offered handshake. Her grip was firm, confident, manicured nails, perfectly shaped. "Oh yes, the brilliant branding consultant who's known him since high school. How wonderful that you two have stayed such close friends all these years." The emphasis on friends was subtle but unmistakable. Lila felt Ethan tense beside her. "Actually," he said, his voice carrying a slight edge, "Lila and I are together now. She's my girlfriend." Something flickered across Elise's expression, surprise, maybe, or calculation, but her smile never wavered. "How lovely," she said. "I'm so happy for you both, Ethan. We should definitely talk later about the Singapore project. I have some thoughts that might interest you." And just like that, she was gone, moving through the crowd with the grace of someone who belonged here absolutely and completely. "Well, she seems nice," Lila said, trying to keep her voice light. Ethan looked down at her, concern creasing his forehead. "You okay?" Before she could answer, they were approached by another couple, the Harrisons, old family friends of Ethan's, according to his quick introduction. They were polite enough, asking Lila about her work, nodding in all the right places when she explained what branding consulting involved, but she could see the subtle assessments happening the way their eyes catalogued her dress, her jewelry, her background. The evening continued in much the same way. Ethan introduced her to business associates and old friends, and Lila smiled and made conversation, and tried not to feel like a specimen under a microscope. Everyone was perfectly pleasant, but there was an underlying current of surprise, and in some cases, barely concealed judgment about Ethan's choice of companion. During dinner, she found herself seated between a hedge fund manager's wife, who spoke exclusively about her recent trip to Monaco, and a tech entrepreneur who clearly had no idea how to talk to someone who didn't move in his circles. Across the table, she watched Ethan engaged in animated conversation with a group of investors, completely in his element, and felt the distance between them like a physical ache. So, Lila, the hedge fund manager's wife, Beatrice, she thought, was saying, "What do your parents do?" It was an innocent enough question. But Lila knew what was really being asked. "What's your background? What's your breeding? Do you belong here?" "My mother was a nurse," Lila said evenly. "She passed away a few years ago. My father works construction." Beatrice's perfectly shaped eyebrows rose slightly. "Oh, how interesting." The conversation moved on, but Lila felt the weight of that moment settling over her. She excused herself during the main course, needing air, needing space, needing to escape the suffocating politeness of people who were trying to figure out what she was doing there. The hotel's powder room was a sanctuary of marble and soft lighting. Lila leaned against the counter and stared at herself in the mirror, trying to reconcile the woman looking back at her with the confident professional she was in her own world. The door opened, and Elise walked in, touching up her already perfect lipstick. "Beautiful event, isn't it?" she said conversationally. Lovely, Lila replied, not trusting herself to say more. You know, Elise continued, capping her lipstick and turning to face Lila directly, I really do think it's wonderful that you and Ethan are together. He deserves someone who makes him happy. Thank you. I just hope you understand what you're getting into. Elise's voice remained pleasant, but there was steel underneath. This world, our world, it's not easy for outsiders. The expectations, the scrutiny, the constant evaluation. It takes a special kind of person to handle it. Lila felt haar spine strijten. Are you saying I'm not that kind of person? I'm not saying anything. Elise's smile was sharp. I'm just observing that love, while wonderful, isn't always enough to bridge certain gaps. The words hit their target with surgical precision. Lila felt them sink into all her deepest fears, all her worst insecurities about what she was to Ethan and whether it could ever be enough. Excuse me, she said quietly, and walked out of the powder room on unsteady legs. She found Ethan at their table, looking around with a concerned expression that cleared the moment he saw her. There you are, he said, standing to pull out her chair. I was starting to worry. I'm fine, she said, settling back into her seat, but she wasn't fine. Elise's words echoed in her head, mixing with every sideways glance and polite but dismissive comment she'd endured all evening. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur. Lila smiled and nodded and made appropriate responses, but inside she felt like she was drowning. When the evening finally ended, and they were in Ethan's car heading back to her apartment, the silence between them felt heavy with unspoken tension. You've been quiet, Ethan said as they waited at a red light. Did something happen? Lila stared out the window at the late-night cityscape. Just tired. Lila. His voice was gentle but insistent. Talk to me. She turned to look at him, this man she loved, sitting behind the wheel of his expensive car in his perfectly tailored tuxedo, and felt the weight of all the ways they were different pressing down on her chest. Do you ever think about, she asked quietly, how different our lives are? What do you mean? Tonight, all of it. That's your world, Ethan, those people. That lifestyle, those expectations. And she took a shaky breath. I don't fit. That's not true. The light turned green, and he started driving again. But she could see the tension in his jaw. I spent the entire evening feeling like an imposter, like everyone could see that I don't belong there. You belong wherever you want to be, Ethan said firmly. And you belong with me, do I? The question came out smaller than she'd intended, because tonight felt like trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. And I'm starting to wonder if maybe Elise was right. Ethan's hands tightened on the steering wheel. What did Elise say to you? Lila closed her eyes, suddenly exhausted. That love isn't always enough to bridge certain gaps. The car fell silent, except for the hum of the engine and the distant sounds of the city around them. When Ethan finally spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. And you believe her? I don't know what to believe anymore, Lila whispered. All I know is that tonight made me realize just how different we are. And maybe that matters more than we want to admit. The silence in Lila's apartment was deafening. She stood in her small kitchen, still wearing the black dress from the gala, mechanically making tea she didn't want, while Ethan sat on her couch, his bow tie undone and hanging loose around his neck. The contrast between her modest one-bedroom apartment and the world they'd just left felt starker than ever. You're shutting me out, Ethan said quietly from the living room. Lila didn't respond. She couldn't, because he was right, and she didn't know how to explain that shutting him out felt like the only way to protect what was left of her heart. The kettle whistled, and she poured water over a tea bag with shaking hands. Through the thin walls of her apartment building, she could hear her neighbor's television, the sound of normal people living normal lives, people who didn't have to worry about whether they belonged in their boyfriend's world. Lila, Ethan's voice was closer now. She turned to find him standing in the doorway of her kitchen. His expression was a mixture of frustration and hurt. Please talk to me. What do you want me to say? She set down the kettle harder than necessary. That tonight was wonderful? That I felt completely comfortable being judged by every person we met? That I enjoyed having Elise explain to me how I don't belong in your life? She doesn't speak for me, Ethan said, stepping into the small kitchen. Her opinion doesn't matter, doesn't it? Lila turned to face him fully. Because she's not wrong, Ethan. Tonight proved that. I watched you in that room, and you were in your element. You belonged there in a way I never will. That doesn't mean... It means everything. The words erupted out of her, months of buried insecurity finally breaking free. It means that when you need a date for business events, I'll always be the one who doesn't quite fit. It means that your friends and colleagues will always see me as the girl from the wrong side of town who somehow managed to catch your attention. It means that eventually you're going to realize that loving me isn't worth the complications I bring to your life." Ethan stared at her, something like shock crossing his features. "Is that really what you think? That I see you as a complication, don't you?" Lila's voice cracked. "Be honest, Ethan. Tonight was exhausting. And it was just one evening. How many more galas are there going to be? How many more business dinners where I have to smile and pretend I understand references to things I've never experienced? How many more times am I going to have to prove that I'm worthy of being with you? You don't have to prove anything to anyone." "Yes, I do." The words came out louder than she'd intended, because that's what happens when people from different worlds try to make it work. Someone always has to change. Someone always has to compromise who they are. And we both know it's not going to be you. Ethan went very still. "What is that supposed to mean?" Lila wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the warmth of the kitchen. "It means that you have a company to run, and a reputation to maintain, a social circle that expects certain things from you. And I'm not what they expect. I don't care what they expect. You should." The words tasted bitter in her mouth. "Because whether you want to admit it or not, it matters. Your business relationships matter. Your social connections matter. And she took a shaky breath. "I'm a liability." The silence that followed was deafening. Ethan stared at her as if she'd slapped him, and maybe speaking the truth felt like violence when you'd been trying so hard to ignore it. "A liability?" he repeated slowly. Lila couldn't meet his eyes. "Tell me I'm wrong. Tell me that having a girlfriend who gets uncomfortable at charity galas and doesn't know which fork to use for the salad course isn't going to affect your business. Tell me that Elise Harper and women like her won't always be easier options for you." "Easier." Ethan's voice was rising now, anger finally breaking through his careful control. "You think I want easy? You think I've spent 12 years of my life caring about you because you're convenient? I think you spent 12 years caring about me as your friend." Lila shot back, "And I think trying to turn that into something more was a mistake for both of us." The words hung between them like a sword, sharp and final. Ethan took a step back as if she'd physically pushed him. "A mistake," he said quietly. Lila felt tears threatening and blinked them back fiercely. "Yes, a mistake. Because we were happy before, Ethan. We were content. And now," she gestured helplessly between them, "now we're fighting about things that never mattered when we were just friends." "Things like what? Like me wanting to include you in my life? Like me being proud to have you by my side? Things like me not being enough," she whispered. "Things like you, eventually realizing that you could have someone who fits seamlessly into your world instead of someone who makes it more complicated." Ethan ran both hands through his hair, his carefully styled appearance finally showing cracks. "This is insane. You're creating problems that don't exist." "They do exist." Lila's voice broke. "They existed tonight in every sideways glance and polite smile, and carefully worded question about my background. They exist every time your phone rings with another business opportunity that requires a certain type of girlfriend by your side. They exist every time I have to Google what to wear to some event I've never heard of. So, we'll figure it out together. We'll know." The word came out with finality that surprised them both. "No, we won't. Because I can't keep pretending that this is going to work. I can't keep pretending that love is enough to overcome everything that's different about us." Ethan went very still. "What are you saying?" Lila looked at him, really looked at him, at the man who'd been her anchor for 12 years, who'd held her while she cried, who'd celebrated every victory and weathered every storm by her side, the man she'd asked to be her first, who'd given her everything she'd asked for and more, the man she was about to lose because she was too afraid to fight for what they had. "I'm saying that maybe we should go back to being friends," she said, each word feeling like glass in her throat, "before we destroy what we've always had, trying to make it into something it was never meant to be." The silence stretched between them, heavy with the weight of everything they'd built and everything they were about to tear down. Ethan's expression cycled through hurt, anger, and finally something that looked like resignation. "If that's what you want," he said quietly. "It's not about what I want," Lila whispered. "It's about what makes sense." Ethan nodded slowly, his jaw tight. "Right. What makes sense?" He looked around her small kitchen at the modest life she'd built for herself, and she saw the exact moment he made his decision. "Well, then I guess there's nothing left to say." He walked toward her front door, pausing only to pick up his jacket from where he draped it over her couch. At the door, he turned back to look at her one more time. "For what it's worth," he said, his voice carefully controlled. "You were never a liability to me, Lila. You were everything." And then he was gone, leaving Lila alone in her apartment with the echo of his words and the devastating realization that she might have just made the biggest mistake of her life. But it was too late now. The words had been spoken, the damage done. All she could do was sit on her couch and try to convince herself that walking away from the best thing that had ever happened to her was somehow the right choice. 3 weeks of silence felt like 3 years. Lila sat at her desk, staring at the same client proposal she'd been trying to finish for the past hour, the words blurring together on the screen. Outside her office window, November rain painted gray streaks down the glass, matching the gray fog that had settled over her life since that night in her apartment. Her phone buzzed with a text from Sophie. "Still nothing from him?" Lila typed back quickly. "No. And that's for the best." But even as she sent the message, her heart clenched with the lie. Nothing about the past 3 weeks had been for the best. She'd lost her appetite, her sleep, and worst of all, her ability to concentrate on anything that wasn't Ethan Blake, and the devastating look on his face when she'd destroyed everything between them. "Lila." Sophie's reply came immediately. "You need to fix this. Today." Before Lila could respond, her office door opened, and Sophie herself walked in, carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing an expression that brooked no argument. "We need to talk," Sophie said, setting 1 cup on Lila's desk and settling into the chair across from her. "And don't even think about giving me that 'I'm fine' bullshit, because you look like you haven't slept in a month." "I'm working," Lila said weakly. "No, you're staring at a computer screen and pretending to work while you slowly torture yourself to death." Sophie leaned forward, her voice gentle but firm. "Honey, what you did was stupid. Monumentally, catastrophically stupid. But it's not irreversible." Lila finally looked up from her screen. "Yes, it is. You didn't see his face, Sophie. You didn't hear what I said to him. So tell me." And somehow, the whole story came pouring out. The gala, Elise's pointed comments, the fight in her apartment, the awful moment when she'd called their relationship a mistake. Sophie listened without interruption, her expression growing more horrified with each detail. "Jesus, Lila," she said when the story was finished, "you really went for the nuclear option, didn't you? I was protecting us both." "You were protecting yourself," Sophie corrected, "from having to be brave, from having to fight for what you wanted, from having to believe that you deserved good things." The words hit like physical blows. "That's not, it is." Sophie's voice was kind but unyielding. "And the worst part is that you convinced yourself it was noble, that you were being selfless by walking away instead of selfish by staying." Lila felt tears threatening for the 100th time in 3 weeks. "It doesn't matter now. It's over." "Is it?" Sophie pulled out her phone and showed Lila a photo from Instagram. It was Ethan at some business event, smiling for the camera, but looking hollow around the eyes, because he looks about as miserable as you do. Lila stared at the photo, drinking in every detail of his face. He was wearing the navy suit she'd always said looked good on him, but there was something different about his posture, something defeated in the way he held himself. "He's probably better off," she whispered. "Are you insane?" Sophie's voice rose slightly. "That man has been in love with you for 12 years. 12 years, Lila. And when you finally gave him a chance to show you how much you meant to him, you threw it back in his face because some jealous socialite made you feel insecure. It wasn't just Elise." "Yes, it was." Sophie leaned back in her chair. "It was her and your own fears and your complete inability to believe that someone could love you exactly as you are. But mostly, it was cowardice." The word stung because it was true. Lila had been a coward. She'd taken the easy way out, choosing the familiar pain of loneliness over the terrifying possibility of being truly happy. "Even if you're right," Lila said quietly, "it's too late. I destroyed everything. I told him loving me was a mistake." "Then you need to tell him you were wrong," Sophie said. "No." Sophie stood up, her expression determined. "No more excuses. No more self-pity. No more hiding behind fear. You're going to march yourself over to his office right now and fight for the best thing that ever happened to you." Lila shook her head. "I can't. What if he won't see me? What if he's moved on? What if he hasn't?" Sophie interrupted. "What if he's sitting in his office right now missing you just as much as you're missing him? What if he's waiting for you to be brave enough to come back and fix what you broke?" The possibility hung in the air between them, terrifying and hopeful, in equal measure. "I wouldn't even know what to say," Lila whispered. "Start with the truth," Sophie said gently. "Tell him that you love him. Tell him that you were scared and stupid and wrong. Tell him that you want to fight for what you have, instead of running away from it. Lila looked out the window at the gray afternoon, then back at Sophie's expectant face. For the first time in 3 weeks, she felt something other than despair stirring in her chest. It was small and fragile, but it felt suspiciously like hope. What if it's too late? She asked one more time. Then at least you'll know you tried, Sophie said. But Lila, I don't think it's too late. Love like what you two have doesn't just disappear because of one fight, even a really terrible one. Lila took a shaky breath and stood up. Her hands were trembling, and her heart was beating so fast she could hear it in her ears. But for the first time in weeks, she felt like she could breathe properly. Okay, she said. Okay, I'm going to do it. Right now, before I lose my nerve. Sophie grinned. That's my girl. Now go get your man back. An hour later, Lila stood in the lobby of Ethan's building, her courage wavering as she stared at the bank of elevators that would take her to his office. She'd changed into her best dress, fixed her makeup, and practiced what she was going to say during the entire drive over. But now, faced with the reality of seeing him again, her carefully rehearsed words scattered like leaves in the wind. The elevator ride to the 32nd floor felt endless. When the doors opened, she was greeted by Ethan's assistant, a kind woman named Clara, who'd always been friendly to her. Lila. Clara's surprise was evident. I didn't know you were coming by. Let me check if Ethan is. He's in, Lila interrupted, unable to wait for pleasantries. Yes, but he's in a meeting with Elise Harper. The voice came from behind Clara. And Lila turned to see Ethan, standing in the doorway of his office. He looked tired, she noticed, with shadows under his eyes that matched her own. She was just leaving. Elise appeared beside him, perfectly polished as always, her smile sharp when she saw Lila. How unexpected. Well, Ethan, we'll continue this conversation later. Think about what I said about the Singapore expansion. She swept past Lila without another word, leaving behind the subtle scent of expensive perfume and the weight of unspoken implications. Ethan and Lila stared at each other across the reception area, 3 weeks of hurt and longing stretching between them like a chasm. Clara, Ethan said quietly, not taking his eyes off Lila, hold my calls. Of course. Clara busied herself with paperwork, tactfully ignoring the tension in the air. Come in, Ethan said, stepping aside to let Lila into his office. As she walked past him, close enough to catch the familiar scent of his cologne, Lila felt her heart fracture all over again. This was the man she'd walked away from. This was the love she'd thrown away, because she'd been too afraid to fight for it. The door closed behind them with a soft click, and suddenly they were alone together for the first time since that terrible night in her apartment. So, Ethan said, walking to his desk but not sitting down, what brings you here, Lila? His voice was carefully neutral, professionally polite, and it cut through her like a knife. This was how he spoke to clients, to acquaintances, to people who didn't matter to him. I came to tell you that I was wrong, she said, the words rushing out before she could lose her nerve. About everything about us being a mistake, about not fitting into your world, about love not being enough. I was wrong about all of it. Ethan's expression didn't change. Were you? Yes. She took a step toward him, then stopped when she saw him tense. I was scared, Ethan, terrified of not being good enough for you, of embarrassing you, of eventually losing you anyway. So, I convinced myself that walking away was protecting us both. But really, I was just protecting myself. I see. His voice was still neutral, but she caught a flicker of something in his eyes, pain, maybe, or hope. And what changed your mind? Lila took a deep breath. The past 3 weeks without you have been the worst of my life. Worse than when my mother died. Worse than any heartbreak I've ever experienced. Because I didn't just lose my boyfriend, Ethan. I lost my best friend. I lost the person who knows me better than anyone else in the world. I lost the man I love more than my own life. Something cracked in Ethan's carefully controlled facade. Lila, he said, his voice breaking slightly. I love you, she continued, tears streaming down her face now. I love you so much that it terrifies me. And yes, your world is intimidating. And yes, I felt out of place at that gala. And yes, Elise Harper made me feel like I didn't belong. But you know what I realized? I don't need to belong in your world, Ethan. I just need to belong with you. The silence that followed felt eternal. Ethan stared at her, his expression unreadable, and Lila felt her heart breaking all over again as she prepared for him to tell her it was too late, that she'd hurt him too badly, that some words couldn't be taken back. Instead, He crossed the room in 3 quick strides and pulled her into his arms. The embrace felt like coming home and falling apart all at once. Ethan held her tightly against his chest, his face buried in her hair, and Lila could feel the tremor in his hands as they pressed against her back. For a moment, neither of them spoke. They just held each other in the quiet of his office. 3 weeks of separation and heartbreak melting away in the simple act of being close again. "I missed you," he whispered against her ear, his voice rough with emotion. "God. Lila, I missed you so much." She pulled back to look at his face, seeing her own pain reflected in his eyes. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for what I said to you. For calling us a mistake, for pushing you away when all you wanted was to love me." Ethan cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away the tears on her cheeks. "I should have fought harder for you. I should have made you see." "No." Lila shook her head firmly. "You did everything right. I was the one who was too scared to let myself be happy, too convinced that I didn't deserve this. Didn't deserve you. Lila." His voice was gentle but firm. "You deserve everything. You deserve love and happiness, and someone who sees how incredible you are. And if my world can't see that, then maybe it's my world that needs to change, not you." Before she could respond, there was a sharp knock on his office door. They broke apart reluctantly as Clara's voice came through the intercom. "Ethan, I'm sorry to interrupt, but Elise is back. She says it's urgent about the Singapore deal." Lila felt her stomach drop. The real world was intruding again, reminding her of all the reasons she'd walked away in the first place. But before she could step back, before she could retreat into old fears, Ethan's hand found hers and held it firmly. "Tell her I'm in a meeting," he said into the intercom, his eyes never leaving Lila's face, an important one that can't be interrupted. But she said Clara. His voice carried the quiet authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "Please ask Elise to schedule an appointment for next week. Whatever she needs to discuss can wait." There was a pause, then Clara's slightly surprised voice. "Of course, I'll let her know." Lila stared at him, something warm and fragile blooming in her chest. "You just dismissed a multi-million-dollar business opportunity for me?" "No," Ethan said, pulling her closer. "I chose you over business, over expectations, over anything else that tries to come between us. And I'll keep choosing you every single day for as long as you'll let me. But the Singapore deal will happen or it won't," he interrupted. "There will always be another deal, another opportunity, another Elise Harper trying to dictate how I should live my life. But there's only one you, Lila. There's only one woman who's been my best friend for 12 years, who knows me better than I know myself, who makes me want to be a better man just by existing." She felt fresh tears spilling down her cheeks, but these were different, not tears of grief or fear, but of overwhelming relief and love. "I don't know how to do this," she whispered, "how to be with someone whose life is so different from mine, how to navigate your world without losing myself in it." "Then we'll figure it out together," Ethan said simply. "We'll set boundaries. We'll go to the events that matter to you, too, not just the ones that matter to my business. What if I embarrass you?" "Impossible." His smile was soft and full of love. "You could never embarrass me, Lila. You could only make me proud. What if Elise was right? What if love isn't enough?" Ethan was quiet for a moment, considering her question seriously. "Maybe love alone isn't enough," he said finally. "Maybe it also takes courage and compromise, and the willingness to fight for each other when things get hard. But we have all of those things, don't we?" Lila thought about the past 3 weeks, about the misery of living without him, about the courage it had taken to come here today and lay her heart bare. "Yes," she said quietly, "we do. Then we have enough." He leaned down and kissed her forehead gently. "More than enough." There was another knock on the door, more insistent this time. Ethan sighed and walked over to open it, revealing Elise standing in the doorway with Clara looking apologetic behind her. "I'm sorry," Clara said quickly. She insisted. "It's fine, Clara," Ethan said calmly. "Elise, what can I do for you?" Elise's eyes moved between Ethan and Lila, taking in their closeness, the obvious intimacy between them. Her perfect smile faltered slightly. "I wanted to discuss the timeline for Singapore," she said, but her voice lacked its usual confidence. "The investors are expecting an answer by Friday." "Then they'll have one," Ethan replied evenly. "By email. There's no need for another meeting." "But Ethan, this is a $40 million opportunity. Surely it deserves more attention than—" "It will get all the attention it deserves," he interrupted, his voice carrying a note of finality. "During business hours. Right now, I'm exactly where I need to be." Elise's gaze landed on Lila again, and this time there was something like respect in her eyes, or maybe recognition, the acknowledgement that the battle she'd thought she was winning had already been lost. "I see," she said quietly. "Well then, I'll wait for your email." She turned to leave, then paused and looked back at Lila. "For what it's worth," she said, her voice softer than Lila had ever heard it. "He never looked at anyone the way he looks at you. I should have realized that wasn't something I could compete with." And then she was gone, leaving Lila staring after her in shock. Did she just, Lila started, admit defeat? Ethan closed the door and leaned against it, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "I think she did. I don't understand. She seemed so confident that I didn't belong." "She was trying to scare you away," Ethan said gently, "because she could see what I felt for you, even when I was trying to hide it, even when we were supposedly just friends." "You were hiding it?" Ethan laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Lila, I've been in love with you since college. I've spent years watching you date other people, consoling myself with the fact that at least I got to be your friend. When you asked me to, when we finally crossed that line, it wasn't just about giving you what you wanted. It was about finally getting to show you how I'd felt all along." The confession hit her like a physical blow. "All along?" "All along." He moved away from the door and took her hands in his. "So when you called it a mistake, when you said we should go back to being friends, it wasn't just losing a girlfriend, Lila. It was losing the one chance I thought I'd ever have to love you the way I've always wanted to." Lila felt her heart breaking and healing at the same time. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I was terrified of losing you completely. Because your friendship was the most precious thing in my life, and I couldn't risk it. Because I thought if I could just be content with what we had, it would be enough. And now?" Ethan lifted their joined hands and pressed a soft kiss to her knuckles. "Now I know that life is too short to settle for enough when you could have everything." The words hung between them, weighted with 12 years of friendship, 3 weeks of heartbreak, and the promise of something beautiful and uncertain stretching out ahead of them. "So what happens now?" Lila asked softly. "Now," Ethan said, pulling her closer, "we stop being afraid. We stop letting other people define what we should be to each other. We stop running from the best thing that's ever happened to us. And if it gets hard, if there are more galas and more Elise Harpers and more moments when I feel like I don't fit, then we face them together," he said simply, "and we remember that the only opinion that matters is ours, that the only world we need to fit into is the one we create together." Lila looked into his eyes and saw her future there, messy and complicated, and absolutely perfect. She saw late-night conversations and lazy Sunday mornings, business dinners where he'd hold her hand under the table, and quiet evenings in her small apartment. She saw a life built on friendship and love, and the courage to keep choosing each other day after day. "Okay," she said, standing on her tiptoes to kiss him softly. "Let's build a world together." And as Ethan's arms tightened around her, as the late afternoon sun streamed through his office windows and painted them both in golden light, Lila finally understood what Elise had been wrong about. Love might not always be enough to bridge every gap, but love combined with courage, with choice, with the willingness to fight for each other, that was everything. 2 years later, the small outdoor ceremony was nothing like the grand society wedding everyone had expected. Lila stood at the edge of the garden behind her father's house, smoothing down the flowing fabric of her simple ivory dress. Through the French doors, she could see their guests gathered on the lawn, a perfect blend of two worlds that had somehow learned to coexist. Sophie sat next to Clara from Ethan's office, both of them dabbing at their eyes with tissues. Her father, looking uncomfortable but proud in his best suit, chatted quietly with Ethan's business partner about construction projects and market trends. "You ready for this?" her father asked, appearing beside her with that gentle smile that still reminded her of her mother. "More than ready," Lila said, and meant it completely. The past 2 years hadn't been perfect. There had been moments of doubt, social events where she still felt out of place, business trips that kept them apart longer than either of them liked. But there had also been quiet Sunday mornings in Ethan's loft, late-night conversations about dreams and fears, the gradual building of a life that belonged to both of them. Ethan had kept his promise about creating boundaries. They'd started a tradition of alternating between his world and hers, charity galas followed by neighborhood barbecues, business dinners balanced by coffee dates at their old cafe. He'd even convinced her to let him invest in her consulting business, helping her expand into markets she'd never dreamed of reaching. She's scared, but trying not to show it, she heard Sophie say to Clara as they walked past the window. "Classic Lila." Lila smiled, some things never changed. The music started, not a traditional wedding march, but the song that had been playing in that hotel room 2 years ago, when everything between them had shifted. Ethan's choice. And it was perfect. She walked through the French doors and onto the lawn, her father beside her, and felt her breath catch at the sight waiting for her. Ethan stood under the simple arch they'd decorated with white roses and ivy, wearing a navy suit that made his eyes look even darker. But it wasn't his appearance that made her heart skip. It was the expression on his face, pure joy, mixed with something that looked suspiciously like wonder, as if he still couldn't quite believe this was happening. The ceremony was short and personal, officiated by the same judge who had presided over her parents' wedding 30 years earlier. They'd written their own vows, and when it came time for Ethan to speak, his voice was steady but emotional. "Lila," he began, "you asked me once to be part of the most important moment in your life. I thought I understood what you meant then, but I was wrong. Every moment with you has been important. Every laugh, every tear, every ordinary Tuesday morning when I wake up and remember that, somehow, impossibly, you chose me." He paused, his thumb brushing across her knuckles where their hands were joined. "You've taught me that love isn't about fitting into someone else's world. It's about building something new together. Something that's bigger and better than either of us could create alone. So today, I'm not just promising to love you, I'm promising to keep building with you, to keep choosing courage over fear, to keep believing that what we have is worth fighting for." When it was Lila's turn, she looked out at their small gathering of family and friends, then back at Ethan's face. "I used to think love was about finding someone who would accept me as I am," she said, "but you've shown me it's about finding someone who sees who I could become and loves both versions equally. You've been my best friend, my safe harbor, my greatest adventure, and now you get to be my husband, which feels like the most natural thing in the world and the most miraculous at the same time." She took a shaky breath, feeling tears threaten. "I promise to stop running when things get scary. I promise to trust that what we have is strong enough to weather any storm. And I promise to keep surprising you, keep growing with you, keep falling in love with you every single day." When the judge pronounced them married and Ethan kissed her, the small crowd erupted in cheers and applause, but Lila barely heard them. All she could focus on was the feel of her husband's lips on hers, the way he smiled against her mouth, the absolute rightness of this moment they'd fought so hard to reach. The reception was held right there in the garden, with string lights twinkling overhead and a local band playing soft jazz. Lila's father gave a toast about watching his daughter find her courage, and Sophie gave one about stubborn friends who needed to be pushed toward happiness. Even Clara offered a few words about watching Ethan transform from a successful but lonely businessman into someone who radiated contentment. As the evening wound down, Lila found herself standing at the edge of the garden with Ethan, watching their guests mingle and laugh under the stars. "Any regrets?" he asked, slipping his arms around her from behind. "Only one," she said, leaning back against his chest. "What's that?" "I wish my mother could have been here to see this." Ethan's arms tightened around her. "She would have loved seeing you this happy." "She would have loved you," Lila corrected. "She always said I'd know when I found the right person because it would feel like coming home. And does it feel like coming home?" Lila turned in his arms to face him. This man who had been her anchor for 14 years, her lover for 2, and now her husband for exactly 4 hours. She thought about the journey that had brought them here, the fear and uncertainty, the mistakes and reconciliations, the gradual building of something beautiful and strong. "No," she said softly, and saw confusion flicker across his features. "It doesn't feel like coming home." She stood on her tiptoes and kissed him gently. "It feels like leaving on the greatest adventure of my life with the only person I'd ever want to explore the world with." Ethan's smile was radiant. "Mrs. Blake, I think this is going to be quite an adventure." "Mr. Blake," she replied, loving the sound of their shared name. "I'm counting on it." As they swayed together to the soft music drifting from the reception, Lila reflected on how wrong she'd been 2 years ago. Love hadn't been enough to bridge the gaps between them. But love combined with courage, with trust, with the willingness to keep choosing each other day after day that had been everything they needed to build something lasting and beautiful and absolutely their own. And as the stars wheeled overhead and their laughter mingled with the night air, Lila knew that this wasn't an ending at all. It was the most perfect beginning she could have imagined.